This Saturday at 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time, we have a Big Ten football matchup taking place between the 5-4, 3-3 in Big Ten play Michigan Wolverines and the undefeated 9-0, 6-0 in Big Ten play 8th-ranked Indiana Hoosiers. This game will be streamed on CBS. Indiana opened up as a 14-point favorite, and the line has stayed steady at Indiana minus 14, and the Hoosiers are given an 86.9% chance to win this game according to ESPN's FPI. Who would have thought in the preseason that Michigan would be a 2-touchdown underdog to Indiana? Or as I would have formerly said, lowly Indiana. But the Hoosiers, as we will be discussing in today's Michigan versus Indiana preview and prediction, they're anything but lowly, and they are heavily favored by analytics. They are an awesome team. I'd say an elite team. Michigan's a team that has elite talent and therefore a chance in this matchup, but they have not performed even close to their preseason expectations. Before we get into this matchup here, can you do me a favor and hit the subscribe button and click the notification bell so that you can get notified when I release more content so that we can get closer to 30,000 subscribers. We just passed 20,000 subscribers, and we will be doing a giveaway at the end of the regular season to celebrate that. Let's now hit 30,000 subscribers, shall we? This is the best Big Ten football channel on YouTube, and thanks to you, one day we will become the best college football channel on YouTube. So subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, also like this video to give us a boost in the algorithm, share this video around to others who will enjoy this content because they're passionate about college football. Comment your own preview and prediction for this game down in the comment section below, and I will do my best to engage with you. And also join our Discord server via the link in the description or down below in the pinned comment. We talk college football 24/7. There are some content creators in the Discord server as well if you're looking for more college football content. And on Saturdays especially, we are active. And if you want to support the channel monetarily, lastly, you can comment a super chat in the comment section below or via links in the description or down below in the pinned comment. You can check out my Patreon page and sign up as a paid member, or purchase merchandise via my merchandise store. There's some nice College Football with Sam merchandise like what I'm wearing here, waiting you, and you can get 18 different College Football with Sam t-shirts, and they're colored in depending on the 18 different Big Ten schools. So there's a lot going on. There's a lot you can do to support the channel, but the free things, liking, sharing, subscribing, hitting the bell, commenting, those are the things that help out the channel the most. So thank you for your support. I appreciate and love all of you. I love the sport. So let's talk about the sport here. This is a game that I did not have circled in the preseason, and I highly doubt either of you or any of you watching did. But you look now at the analytics, and on College Football with Sam, we like to look at the broad things, then dive into the details later. Michigan is only viewed as 5.4 points better than the average college football team per ESPN's FPI. Per S&P Plus, they're viewed as 9.5 points better than the average college football team. Per My Potential Power Index, PPI, they're only viewed as about 5 points better than the average college football team. And potential power, it's something that's new on this channel this year. I showcased it for September and October of last year, but it was all by hand. I have, thankfully, gotten in contact with some people who've helped me automate the process, and it allows me to produce more content while still showcasing potential power, which had a successful week last weekend. But potential power is a lot of individual player ratings and coaching staff ratings. That's basically what it is. So it's refreshing to see that, well, it's basically dead on with FPI, which has been very accurate this season. Indiana is viewed as 19.3 points better than the average college football team per FPI. They're viewed as 19.5 points better than the average college football team per S&P Plus. And per potential power, they're viewed as 21.3 points better than the average college football team. And potential power has a lot more than just player and coach ratings involved. It has a lot of information, statistics that are all bundled together. I go through and manually edit some of it, but not too much because, well, we all have biases. I'm I think, as objective as it gets, but I'm human, and I like to have some computers to help and show me some things that maybe I miss. But to say the least, FPI, S&P Plus, we could bring in K-Ford ratings, my own ratings, potential power, all of them scream that Indiana's the better team here. And when you factor in home field advantage, Indiana probably just give the basic 3-point home field advantage. The stadium now is full, so there's, noise there. It's no longer just kind of a neutral field for whichever team is visiting, but it's not a big stadium either, and it isn't this intimidating environment. I imagine that if Cignetti's going to stay there long term, and this is something that we could theorize about, especially after the season's over, that Indiana may get serious about football, because you should with what they're doing right now. But the Hoosiers here, they'd be favored to beat Michigan per FPI by about 17 points. Per S&P Plus, they'd be favored to win by around 13. And per potential power, they'd be favored to win by about 19 points. So Indiana's a double-digit favorite for a reason. I'm telling you that. And Indiana is rated inside of the top 15 by S&P Plus, the top 10 of FPI, and Indiana's top 5 in my potential power ratings. And Tom Fornelli's ratings, which I don't know if they're exactly power ratings, but they're just performance ratings, he has Indiana at number 1. I mean, this is a really good team, irrespective of the weak strength of schedule, which we will talk about here in a few seconds. Michigan's points per play margin is basically a measurement of dominance. How dominant are you per given play? Michigan only has a 0.005 points per play margin. So on an average basis, Michigan just barely squeaks by their opponents when it comes to winning the points per play battle. As for Indiana, they dominate their opponents in the points per play battle with 0.402 points per play margin. Expected points added margin, Michigan only has a 0.073, so on an average basis, they do win the expected points added margin, but as you can see, that doesn't exactly translate to them winning games, as their offense is very ineffective. Indiana is a very positive 0.263 expected points added margin, but unlike Michigan, they actually do something with it. I mean, look at that points per play margin, 0.402. I said something in a video a few days ago, maybe a week or 2 weeks ago, talking about how Indiana, per points per play margin, is a national title contender because of the teams that they were in the same tier as when comparing 2023, 2022, and 2021 teams in the month of October and what their points per play margin was. Indiana was up there with 2021 Georgia, 2022 Georgia, Ohio State, Michigan, and 2023 Michigan in points per play margin. And I imagine that it would be the same thing if I were to look back on how those teams would do in the month of November, at least to this date in November. November 6th of 2024, or of any of those previous months. So this is a really good team. That's kind of why I'm bouncing all over the place, because it's clear, and it gets clearer and clearer and clearer the more research you do, that Indiana's better than Michigan. Michigan's played a tougher strength of schedule, yes, 21st, but they're only 45th in game control. Game control is basically dominance per game, but adjusted for strength of schedule, which points per play margin, because it's just points per play, that doesn't really adjust for strength of schedule. But game control does, and Indiana's 4th there. They're only behind Ole Miss, Ohio State, and the third team escapes me. It just barely escapes me. But they're only behind Ohio State in the Big Ten. They're ahead of everyone else in the Big Ten in game control. 103rd toughest strength of schedule. Their best opponent is probably Washington. Their best wins probably Michigan State on the road, maybe Nebraska at home because of how dominant that was. Michigan has played Texas, Oregon. They have played Washington on the road, which is probably tougher than any game Indiana has played. And Minnesota right now, power ratings would say Minnesota's better than any team that Indiana's played. So Michigan's played several teams that are tougher per power ratings or just situationally than teams/matchups that Indiana has played against or participated in. But regardless of that, game control tells you that these Hoosiers are good. And as I said earlier, they're a Black Ops unit. They're a Spetsnaz unit. They are they're special forces. Deion Sanders brought Louis Vuitton to Colorado. But what Curt Cignetti brought was a whole Black Ops unit. He brought a whole cartel. And they're not messing around because they are decapitating teams left and right. As for Michigan, they're a very talented team. And I've spent much of this video so far talking about Indiana, and I think rightfully so, because they're fun to talk about. They're a good team. They're a massive storyline in college football. They're ninth right now in the CFP ratings. They're ninth. And they should, in my opinion, they should be higher than that, honestly. They should be higher. But that may sort itself out, and I think an 11-1 IU, just because of how things are going, I think we'll get into the playoffs no matter what, even if the loss to Ohio State. Oh no, they're eighth apparently in the CFP ratings. Correction there. I thought I saw them. Yeah, they'd be seeded ninth, but they're rated eighth. It's confusing. The 12-team playoffs a little bit confusing. I think we're all adjusting to it. But anyway, talking about Michigan isn't as fun because they're not as good and they're very ineffective with their talent. But they're very talented up front. I still think they have one of the best defensive lines in the country. Their issue's been in the backfield on defense and a lack of coaching everywhere, and also the offense performing poorly. But their defensive line is a non-negotiable. I think their running back room, if the blocking in front of them is correct and if Warren is functioning at a high level, can be a non-negotiable. And their kicker, Dominic Zvada, is pretty good. Indiana has Curtis Rourke, Omar Cooper, Elijah Surratt, Justice Ellison, Mike Caddick, Drew Evans, Carter Smith. On defense, they have D'Angelo Pons and Sean Asbury, for example. These rosters are both very good. Michigan's by blue chip ratio or just by blue chip talent is viewed as better, but that's just looking at things through the lens of recruiting rankings, which I think is pretty lame. The critical matchup here, just speaking of all of this, I think is Michigan's non-negotiable, their defensive line, and consequently their entire defense, pitted against an Indiana passing offense that is systemically piecing apart teams. That's the matchup right there. If Michigan can get to Rourke, if they can sack him, if they can pressure him, and at the same time they do just well enough in coverage and tackling to force some punts and to give their offense multiple possessions, then you give Michigan's offense the opportunity to execute game control. Michigan's offense has been a huge problem for their team this season, but that's not the whole picture. That's a very simplistic, I'd say obsolete, intellectually dishonest view of things. Trust me, if Michigan had the defense they did last season, or Iowa's defense of last year, or Ohio State's defense of the Penn State game this season, or what they had last season, or the Penn State defense of this season and last season, or at least this season in the second half, they have some questions, their record would be better. They probably would have beaten Washington, and they maybe would have beaten Illinois. The season would be different. If the defense was just elite and the offense was still about as gutter trash as it's been, the season would be different. The outlook of the year would be different, both via coaching, the roster, the future of the program, etc. The defense has not been good. It has been above average, maybe average. It shows moments of being elite, but then also shows moments of this is not a top 75 unit. It's very inconsistent. The USC game, beautifully called by Wink Martindale, outside of a few plays. It was one of the best performances on defense all season long. Same with the Minnesota game for really the first three quarters. If Michigan brings that type of defensive game plan here, they have a chance because the offense, while again not perfect, shows drives each and every game where it has life. It does because they're so talented at tight end, running back. They have enough talent on the offensive line, and Davis Warren has enough talent at quarterback. Same with Mixon and Alex Orji to keep the defense honest in the run, to where they can put together a few inconsistent / broken drives that can come out with touchdowns or field goals. That's Michigan's path to win here. Indiana's path to win is to just completely negate Michigan's defensive line, which Oregon did, Texas did. The elite teams this year have negated Michigan's D-line by attacking them through the air, by picking on their corners, their safeties, their linebackers, by going on the outside with runs and misdirection and pitches to avoid Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant. That's what the elite teams have done. And Indiana, I'm just going to read you some numbers here, and you can tell me whether they're an elite team or not. Indiana, 0.633 points per play offensively. That's first. 0.402 points per play margin. That's second. They're only behind Army, who has probably faced the equivalent strength of schedule, if not an inferior one. And I can tell you by just knowing the scheme that Army runs versus the scheme Indiana runs, what Indiana is doing is much more sustainable against top-tier competition than what Army does. But I think Army's a good team. I think they deserve to be ranked inside of the top 25 of the college football playoff, for example. And maybe they have a chance against Notre Dame, but that's for a different video. You look at red zone scoring attempts per game. Indiana 5.8. They're first. They score 5.6 offensive touchdowns per game, which is second. They are top 10 in both first half points a game and second half points a game. They average 6.6 yards per play. They're not as explosive as many of these other teams, but they're that much more efficient at earning points than many of these teams that are more flashy, that are more quick, fast, that are more explosive. Because Indiana is so fundamentally sound. I think they're the most fundamentally sound team right now in the entire country. This also pans out on defense, where they allow 4.3 opponent yards per play, 6th. They allow 15 points per game, 7th. They allow 0.232 opponent points per play, and they're 10th in opponent yards per point. Opponents have to gain 18.6 yards to score a single point. Indiana, conversely, has to gain on offense only 10.5 yards to score a point, and that's because their special teams is good. They force turnovers. They tackle well, so they force punts fairly often. You look at punts per offensive score here. Indiana is second there, and they're fourth in punts per play, only averaging 0.04 punts per play. That's the mark of an elite team right there. And that's just looking at the broad statistics. We can dive deeper into Indiana's passing offense, which I think is a key feature of this matchup. Indiana's averaging 9.5 yards per pass attempt, which is 6th. 13.7 yards per completion, which is 16th. Their completion percentage right now on average is a 69.43%, 7th. And their quarterback sack percentage is inside the top 15. On only 2.97% of their dropbacks, they give up a sack. They're 4th in average team passer rating, and they only give up 0.9 sacks per game. What does all of this tell you, especially the yards per play, or the yards per pass attempt, so yards per play through the air, and yards per completion, so yards per a catch through the air? That tells you that Indiana is willing. They're willing to go short. And it also tells you that they complete a ton of their throws. That's the high completion percentage. The yards per completion being lower in placement than the yards per pass attempt, that means that they're content taking short and intermediate throws, and they're completing a lot of them. They're completing a lot of the balls that they do throw. And Indiana, by the way, they're only 88th in pass attempts per game, only averaging 28.6 pass attempts per game. They average 38 rushing attempts per game. And their rushing offense it's good. It's more of a power rushing offense. It's something that really breaks you down. They only average 4.6 yards per carry, only have 175.5 rushing yards per game, but they consistently fall forward, and they keep you honest on the ground, and that's how they chew clock and really control the game. They're just an efficient, on time, never gets behind schedule, always shows up early to work, and 30 minutes early to work, not just 5 or 2 minutes early to work. They're efficiency monsters. That offense is going up against a Michigan defense that right now is surrendering 23.3 opponent points per game. It's 44th. Surrendering 0.341 opponent points per play, 46th. That is surrendering 5 opponent yards per play, 38th. Now, given Michigan's strength of schedule and the fact they played Oregon, they played Texas when I think Texas was kind of at their peak, or at least when they put together their best game plan of the season so far. I get that. And there may be a negative bias toward Michigan statistically. But correcting that negative bias may only make Michigan a top 40 or top 30 defense. And they're facing off against arguably a top 5 offense, especially when you look at the passing numbers. Michigan's passing defense is terrible, in part because everyone likes to pass on Michigan, because if you pass on Michigan, particularly on third down, where Michigan allows opponents to complete 43.9% of their third downs, they allow them to convert that many, it's outside the top 100, you will be successful passing against Michigan on third down. It's happened game after game after game. It has. And I don't know if Will Johnson's going to be playing in this game, but at this point, I would say I doubt it with how the injury's been nagging him. Michigan allows opponents to average 6.7 yards per pass attempt, 41st, and 10.7 opponent yards per completion. That's 27th. Michigan only has a 6.19% sack percentage, which is impressive given the fact that opponents on average pass for 35.3 times on Michigan. Michigan's pass rush is really good, but teams, they like to get the ball out quickly at times and then mix in deep shots, and they try everything against Michigan through the air because the defense is good enough to force you to be creative on offense. But if you can be creative on offense against this Michigan defense, you will beat them. So I hope that explanation is pretty clear why this is the critical matchup. If Michigan can limit that passing offense, they can win. But if they can't, Indiana may roll here. And speaking of the offenses, let's talk about them here. I think that Michigan has the edge at tight end. Indiana has the advantage at running back. That's what the push means. Push means it's very close, too close to call. I think I'd lean Michigan at running back, but I may also lean Indiana, so that's why there's a push. It's meant to say RB, not TE, running back, not tight end, just a little mistake there. No big deal. It's not like Michigan, who constantly makes mistakes throughout the game on third down or via penalties or turnovers. It's something Davis Warren's done a very good job at, by the way, not turning over the football. But I think Indiana has the better quarterback, the better receivers, and the better offensive line. Indiana, you look at their quarterback, Curtis Rourke, 188.5 passer rating, 2,204 passing yards. He completes 73.3% of his passes, 19 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, and a 91.6 QBR, which is second. Leads the Big Ten. Even leads Dylan Gabriel in that category. And after Will Howard and Drew Aller put together a I'm not an NFL quarterback combined performance in that what was a 20-13 Ohio State victory, really more dominant than the score indicates for Ohio State victory, he's pulling away from much of the Big Ten. Same thing with Dylan Gabriel, who's really held down by his early season performances. He'd probably be first or third or second, top 3 in QBR if the Idaho game and Boise State games were kind of counted out. But that's not how this works. Anyway, Indiana running back Justice Ellison has 669 rushing yards, 9 rushing touchdowns. Tyson Lawton has 453 rushing yards, 9 rushing touchdowns. Kalen Black and Elijah Green, they have over 100 rushing yards. They're averaging 5 or more yards per carry. Green has 2 rushing touchdowns, or he has 5. Black has 2. Taven Jackson and Curtis Rourke each have a rushing touchdown. Same thing with Miles Price, Omar Cooper Jr., and Charlie Becker. They're very creative on the ground. It's why they have 32 rushing touchdowns. They're also willing to just be pretty basic and bully you at the line of scrimmage and hope that it works for the best, and typically it does. Elijah Surratt, Omar Cooper Jr., Miles Price, Miles Cross, Keyshawn Williams, Zach Horton, Tyson Lawton, all of them have at least 100 receiving yards, and all of them but Tyson Lawton have at least 2 receiving touchdowns or more. Surratt leads the team with 649. Omar Cooper Jr. has 474. Miles Price has 361. Miles Cross has 289. Keyshawn Williams is 271. Zach Horton has 141. And Surratt has 5 touchdowns. Cooper Jr. 4. Price 2. Cross 3. Williams 4. And Horton 3. I think that Michigan's better at tight end, very clearly, with Colston Loveland having 523 receiving yards, 4 receiving touchdowns. But their leading receiver is Tyler Morris with 134 receiving yards and 2 receiving touchdowns. And Samaj Morgan has 126 receiving yards for 1 receiving touchdown and he's averaging 6 yards per catch. And that's in large part because of not just bad schematics, but also because the quarterback situation Michigan's in. It's not a good look. Michigan's receivers and quarterback play are definitely limited by each other. It's not just on one group or the other, it's on both. Loveland, the numbers he's putting up with how unproductive this offense has been, I think shows he's an NFL tight end. I think he's clearly better than Zach Horton. Again, if you're watching, well, you're obviously watching on YouTube. It's the only platform I'm on. But you look at the graphic that I put up here. Michigan's better at tight end. The push meant to be for running back, because Michigan at running back, they got Khalil Mullings and they have Donovan Edwards. And while Indiana, I think, has better depth at running back than Michigan does, Mullings with 710 rushing yards, 7 rushing touchdowns, 5.4 yards per carry, and Edwards, 467 rushing yards, 3 rushing touchdowns, 4.7 yards per carry. I like Michigan's two deep with Mullings and Edwards compared to Indiana's Ellison and Lawton. Not by much, though. I think there's an argument there to have Indiana ahead. And I got to be honest, even though I'm factoring in the offensive line strongly going to Indiana, especially in pass protection, Indiana may have the better backs. So running back, I think, is a clear push here for these teams. Looking on the defensive side of the ball, Michigan's better on the defensive line. I'd say Indiana's better in the defensive backfield at linebacker and defensive back. Check out Mason Graham, Kenneth Grant, Josiah Stewart, Derek Moore, Cameron Brandt, Rayshawn Benny, TJ Guy. It's a strong defensive front. It's one of the strongest, if not the strongest, front four in college football. But what happens when your front four is asked to do everything on defense? Well, when you face teams that are athletic, that have receivers, that have passing offenses, you kind of fold. And what teams have been able to do is they have been able to pass they've been able to pass to open up the running game. That's what Oregon did. It's what Texas did. It's to a certain degree what Minnesota did, although some would say they did it in garbage time, but they got to the point where if they got the onside kick, they probably would have won the game. So the path to beat Michigan is to pass against them and open up the run. The path to beat Indiana's defense, I think, quite frankly, is to, I guess, make plays. I know that's kind of redundant to say, but Indiana's defense is really good. It's absolutely phenomenal. I would say the path to beat Indiana defensively is I'd say to pass, probably in the short, intermediate game. Washington was able to have some success there. Michigan State was able to have a lot more success through the air than running the ball. But again, a lot of that's relating to Michigan State's personnel. Michigan State, at their peak, is much better at quarterback and wide receiver and even tight end than anywhere else on the field. For Nebraska had more success, I think, passing on Indiana, especially utilizing their tight ends compared to running the football. But also Nebraska had a stronger passing offense than a rushing offense. The rushing offense has been problematic for the entire season. Only recently has their passing offense really taken a massive hit. This Indiana defense is very tough, but also to a certain degree has not been tested as much as I or many others would like. But right now they're only allowing 80.1 rushing yards per game, which is second. Michigan's allowing 109.3, which is 19th. Indiana's only allowing opponents to average 2.8 yards per attempt on the ground, which is third. Michigan's allowing opponents to average 3.6, which is 26th. Through the year, we already talked about Michigan's passing defense, but Indiana's passing defense is only allowing 6.1 yards per attempt, 18th, 9.6 opponent yards per completion, which is 4th. As I said, short intermediate passing game. Those numbers tell you that Indiana is very good defensively at keeping people in front of them. Very good at it. So what do? You play their game. That's what you do. You play Indiana's game, let them bend, and then once you get into the red zone, that's where you have to really have that play call to try and break the bend but don't break defense. Because Indiana, they allow 198.4 passing yards per game, is 35th. But they only allow 4 yards per completion. And they allow their opponents to complete 63.46% of their throws. They are willing to give up passing yards. What they don't want to do is give you rushing yards. They don't want to let you control the game. And once you get in their territory, that's when they become more aggressive. That's when the field compresses more and they start to do more things on defense and open up the playbook there. And as I said, get more aggressive. Watch out on defense for Indiana's Mikael Kamara with 9.5 sacks and 2 forced fumbles. All Big Ten caliber defensive end right now. Look out for James Carpenter, Tyreek Tucker, CJ West. They have a very deep defensive line. It was not easy to say that Michigan had a better D-line than Indiana. It was not easy, actually. There may, after this game, be an argument that Michigan has an inferior D-line to Indiana. I would be kind of shocked at that, but it's because Michigan has a lot of talent there, and it's one of their only good positions, and I think it's an elite position nationally. But Indiana has they have a wicked defensive line. Pay attention to their defensive backfield, which features Jamari Sharp, Jalen Walker, D'Angelo Pons, who was 5 passes defended, 2 interceptions, 1 returned for 6. Sean Asbury, who has 1.5 sacks, an interception, 2 passes defended. Aiden Fisher, who has 84 total tackles, leads the team there. 3 passes defended, 1.5 sacks. For Michigan, pay attention to their sack leader, Josiah Stewart, with 6.5, and also Mason Graham, again, Kenneth Grant, Derek Moore, Rayshawn Benny. Look out on defense for Jair Hill, if he's healthy and comes back in this game. 7 passes defended, an interception, 1 sack. Look out for Quentin Johnson in the secondary. Will Johnson, if he's healthy, obviously a player to pay attention to, but I don't know if he'll return. Jayshawn Barham has gotten better as the season has progressed. It's the same thing with linebacker Ernest Hausman. Pay attention to those players defensively. So looking at these two teams here, I'd say that the trenches are pretty equal. I'd also say the special teams are pretty equal. I think Michigan is the better kicker. I think Indiana is the better punter. And I think Indiana is better coached on special teams. But in the trenches, these two teams are pretty equal, I would say. If I had to lean one, I'd actually lean Indiana here. I think that Indiana's O-line has a greater disparity in its favor than Michigan's D-line has a disparity in its favor. So I'd slightly lean Indiana if you had a gun to my head, but I just leave it as a push for now. It's similar with special teams, actually. I think Michigan has the higher upside on special teams, but Indiana's better coached and they have a better punter. They're going to win the field position battle more than Michigan. So you put a gun to my head, I'd say Indiana. I would wish that if I were an Indiana fan, one thing is that I could have Dominic Svada as a kicker because he has a better leg and it's just a better overall kicker than Indiana's kicker. As for coaching, I think strength and conditioning is one of the few proud points for Michigan this year, but I'm beginning to question it the more the season goes along. As for Indiana, it's clear to me they have one of the best strength and conditioning programs in the country because they're tough, they're big. I remember watching the Indiana-Nebraska game and something jumped out to me, that Indiana's linebackers were about as big as Nebraska's offensive linemen, as some of them. And that's a scary thought. Like, they are big, they are fast, I'm not saying they're the most athletic or the largest team in the country. That's not what I'm saying. But they're well-conditioned and they're well-trained. And on top of the fact that Curt Cignetti is a better head coach than Sharon Moore, that Mike Shanahan is a better offensive coordinator with a better offensive staff than what Kurt Campbell is as an OC or what he has at Michigan, and that Bryant Haynes, that his defense is better than Wink Martindale's. His staff, I think, on that side is better than Wink Martindale's. Indiana has a coaching edge. And all this does is lead me to believe that Indiana is going to win this game, and they're going to win big. I could be wrong here. I could be exaggerating. I think Indiana is just going to keep blowing people out. I think that Ohio State game is going to be the only game where they're really, really tested. What Indiana will do if they get the ball first, and they're going to be the first team to score, because I don't think Michigan's just going to get the ball and drive right down the field. That would be a genuine surprise. The first time Indiana gets the ball, they are going to drive down slowly. They're going to let Michigan keep everything in front of them. They're going to be methodical, and they're going to punch it in, and they're going to celebrate, and the crowd's going to roar, and you will know that it's over. I mean, the second Indiana scores a touchdown, first drive, I'm telling you, you will know it's over if you do not know it's over already. Indiana is one of the best teams in the country. And I've been saying this now for a week or two. And I should have jumped on earlier because the analytics tell you, irrespective of strength of schedule, this is a dominant team. They trashed Michigan State like how Ohio State trashed Michigan State. In fact, they trashed MSU closer to how Oregon trashed MSU, which was more impressive than what Ohio State did. Indiana destroyed Nebraska in a more impressive fashion than anyone has. They beat them far. They battered them far worse than Illinois did, than UCLA did, and then Ohio State did. And you begin to make these comparisons, these not transitive property, not something as simple as that, but you begin to cross-reference all of the teams that Indiana's pounded and how they've performed against other teams. Like, think of it this way. Maybe UCLA was this good the entire time outside of that Hawaii week. And maybe the reason why Indiana beat them by 30 points is because they are as good as Oregon. And they're better than Penn State. Like, maybe that's why. It's just things to consider. You begin to cross-reference all these things and look at the analytics. This is an elite team. Michigan is not an elite team. They're not even a good team. They're just above average at best, below average or bad at worst. And it's on the road. Michigan's coming off of a deflating loss to Oregon. And Indiana keeps building momentum and proving people wrong because whether it's Josh Pate saying that he was afraid that MSU would upset Indiana, whether it's other people, and I'm not saying that to hate on Josh Pate. He has a good show. The point is, everyone, even the best in the business, are deceived by Indiana's logo. Indiana's logo right now is a part of their weapons package. It's a part of the Swiss Army knife toolkit because it makes you take them less seriously than you should. This is going to be an assassination for Michigan right here. Thank you all so much for watching. Remember to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and comment your thoughts down below. Thanks to Crash2488, Brasco Rascal, and kind of little OH for being Heisman members. Thanks to Chris Lane, Ismar, and Tyler Nye for being All-American members. And thanks to John Lynn, Roaming Gnome, Matthew Sale, Awesome Christmas, Joshua Jorgensen, Will Loftus for being All-Conference members. Have a great day, everyone. Make sure to check out my merchandise store, Patreon page, and Discord server via the link in the description or down below in the pinned comment. See you all soon. Go Blue, and go Hoosiers.